Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the fascinating psychology behind age gap relationships, power imbalances, and the frameworks that define true emotional maturity. In a world absolutely full of loud internet gurus and endless relationship advice telling you exactly how you're supposed to act, we are cutting straight through the noise. We're going to look at the actual science and psychology behind what makes relationships genuinely tick and sometimes what makes them deeply toxic.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be covering the age gap controversy, the anatomy of power imbalances, recognizing adult manipulation, true emotional maturity, and finally, the equality wheel. Let's get right into it. Part 1, the age gap controversy. So we began by looking at why relationships with significant age differences so consistently capture our cultural attention. When both partners are consenting adults, there's obviously no moral law against it, yet society so often raises an eyebrow. Why is that exactly? Well, to really understand the cultural optics here, consider these lyrics from Taylor Swift's re-recorded album Red. She was writing about her brief relationship at age 20 with a man who was about to turn 30. These lyrics brilliantly highlight what we call the arm candy phenomenon. This is where an older partner seeks a younger companion largely for optics and perceived status. It reflects a societal norm where people, often male celebrities strolling down the red carpet with a young, attractive companion, use their partner to reflect their own prestige. The psychological impact here is profound. When you're treated as a beautiful accessory rather than a fully realized human being with your own thoughts and boundaries, the relationship immediately centers around the older partner's ego rather than a mutual, respectful connection. But what's the actual biological reality behind that societal unease? Well, it comes down to a magic number, 25. Because the human brain, specifically the impulse-controlling prefrontal cortex, literally doesn't fully develop until about age 25. This part of the brain is basically the command center for processing complex judgments, assessing long-term risks, and regulating intense emotions, all of which are absolutely crucial elements for navigating romantic relationships. So think about it. When someone who is comfortably settled into adulthood dates an 18 or 20-year-old, they are effectively choosing a partner without a fully developed adult brain or established self-assurance. This makes the younger partner much less likely to have the tools to stand up to authority figures, question established narratives, or effectively call out poor behavior when they see it. However, to get the full picture, we have to zoom out globally. When we look at the data, the global average age gap is 4.2 years, with the man typically being older. But these numbers fluctuate wildly across different cultures. In North America, the average gap shrinks down to just 2.2 years. But in a country like Gambia, the gap jumps to nearly 15 years on average. So while the underlying biology of brain development is universal, our cultural norms and expectations around age gaps are incredibly diverse. It just goes to show that age differences are heavily influenced by the societal structures and economic realities we live in. Moving right along to part 2, anatomy of power imbalances. So stepping beyond just age, we really need to understand the underlying structures of power that dictate relationship dynamics, because very often age is just a proxy for life experience and resources. That brings us to these 5 power asymmetries: social, financial, emotional, physical, and sexual. Now listen, these aren't automatically toxic. An older partner might simply bring financial stability, while a younger partner brings refreshing energy. But they absolutely require immense honesty and communication to prevent one partner from dominating the other. In certain corners of the internet, especially those toxic podcasts aimed at young men, you'll often hear hosts aggressively promoting social and emotional dominance as the ultimate definition of true masculinity. They deliberately mislead their audience into believing that holding all the financial power, using intimidation, or dictating the emotional weather of the house equates to being a strong leader. But in reality, wielding these asymmetries like a weapon doesn't make you a leader. It just creates a deeply unequal dynamic that ultimately ruins the relationship. Interestingly, society views these power dynamics completely differently depending on gender. A psychological study found that people naturally judge relationships with older men and younger women as inherently unequal. They just assume the older man is using his accumulated resources to attract the younger woman. But in cougar cub relationships, an older woman with a younger man, participants perceived the dynamic as far more equitable, believing both partners were getting a fair and equal deal. Why the massive double standard? It perfectly highlights our built-in, often subconscious assumptions about patriarchal power and who traditionally holds the resources in our society. We automatically assume men will use their resources for control, whereas we view women doing the exact same thing through a much less cynical lens. Part 3, recognizing adult manipulation. So what actually happens when those power asymmetries are actively exploited?
Well, we have to talk about a very real danger here. It is a massive misconception that grooming only happens to minors. Vulnerable, isolated, or inexperienced young adults can absolutely fall victim to this calculated control. Adult grooming is a manipulative process designed to create a power imbalance solely for the older person's benefit. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's a classic boiling frog scenario where boundaries are slowly, steadily eroded. It often starts out beautifully: excessive attention, lavish gifts, and a partner who seems to have all the answers and just wants to take care of everything. But over time, that affection subtly shifts into shaping the younger person's decisions, chipping away at their independence, and fundamentally altering their self-perception. If you find yourself in a dynamic where a partner is using their life experience to isolate you from your friends, or if they're gaslighting you to literally rewrite your reality, these are glaring red flags of toxic manipulation. And we see these exact signs modeled as entertainment or leadership in toxic media spaces all the time. Think about it: the yelling, the public humiliation, and the shock performance that aggressive podcast hosts routinely use to devalue guests or women. They completely disguise basic manipulation as alpha behavior. An older, manipulative partner might constantly call the younger one immature or naive to devalue them and keep the upper hand. But let's be real. Using guilt, isolation, or just sheer volume to control someone isn't leadership. It's a massive red flag, and recognizing these signs is the absolutely essential first step to protecting your own autonomy.
Which brings us to Part 4, True Emotional Maturity. To combat all that control and build something genuinely healthy, we must look at what actually constitutes a healthy adult. This brings us to the fascinating world of emotional development. And here is a brilliant distinction that most people completely miss. Emotional intelligence is basically just having the right vocabulary. You can literally learn it in a weekend workshop and learn to label your feelings. But emotional maturity, that is the actual biological capacity to stay in relationship with yourself when your nervous system is on absolute fire. Unlike the shock jocks and internet gurus who rely on yelling, public humiliation, and tantrums the second they are challenged, true emotional maturity is the ability to regulate yourself and repair the connection after a rupture. The speed and sincerity of your repair, not the absence of a fight, is the true mark of a fully emotionally mature adult. So, how do we actively grow our emotional maturity at any age? Well, you can practice these 3 specific steps rather than defaulting to survival mode tantrums. First, you've got to stop the tape. You need to recognize when your prefrontal cortex has gone offline and take a time out to reset your nervous system. Stopping the tape might mean literally saying, "Hey, I'm too activated to have this conversation right now. I need 20 minutes to cool down." This is absolutely vital because you cannot solve a complex relationship issue when your body genuinely thinks it is fighting a tiger. Then, the next step is turning the psychological flashlight. Usually, when we argue, we point that flashlight outward to blame our partner. We get completely stuck in the story of other, where they're always the villain doing something to us. But mature individuals do something totally radical. They flip that flashlight 180 degrees inward to the experience of self. They pause and ask themselves, what old wounds are being triggered inside me right now? Am I genuinely reacting to my partner or to an old, deeply buried fear of abandonment? This shift from blaming to profound self-exploration is an absolute game changer. Finally, you hold the third chair. This basically means viewing the relationship itself as an external entity that you both need to protect. It immediately shifts the dynamic from me versus you to us versus the problem. And that leads us perfectly into Part 5, the equality wheel. Now that we understand the mechanics of emotional maturity and power dynamics, let's visualize what an equal, non-manipulative partnership actually looks like in practice. This is the equality wheel. This framework stands in direct contrast to the toxic, dominance-based control we talked about earlier. Instead of relying on yelling, humiliation, or financial hoarding to feel secure, healthy relationships revolve around true equality, supported by outer traits like honesty, trustworthiness, and mutual respect. It's an incredibly powerful visual. It's not necessarily about enforcing a strict 50-50 split on every single chore or dollar every single day, but about establishing a baseline of consistent, safe communication where power is genuinely shared. Let's zoom in on a couple of specific spokes here. A core spoke of this wheel is complete safety and consent. In an equal relationship, intimacy is never a tool for power or a bargaining chip. Crucially, the pacing of the relationship feels deeply comfortable for both people. Pacing means no one is rushing you to move in, get married, or commit before you are ready just to lock you down. Consent is freely given without any external influence, guilt-tripping, or pressure. Your bodily autonomy is completely respected at all times. If there is a significant age or experience gap, the partner who traditionally holds more power takes active, intentional steps to ensure the other never, ever feels pressured.
Furthermore, an equal partnership actively neutralizes financial power asymmetries. Instead of one person holding all the purse strings to create dependency, both partners work together on financial decisions. They encourage completely transparent holdings, meaning no secret accounts or hidden debts. And most importantly, they actively support each other's economic independence and professional development. In a mature relationship, you understand that your partner's independence doesn't threaten your bond. It actually strengthens the partnership because it means they are choosing to be with you out of love, not out of financial necessity. So, whether you're navigating a significant age gap, dealing with financial disparities, or simply trying to be a more supportive partner, it all ultimately comes down to your awareness and your intent. As you reflect on the dynamics in your own life and turn that psychological flashlight inward, I want to leave you with this single, vital question. Are you building an empire of control or a partnership of equals? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.